Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Amber, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back with you. It's been a minute.
I know. Are you in like holiday cheer or is it kind of
I'm
like
getting there?
There's
Yeah.
so much news happening that it feels like it's like
I know.
overriding the
Friday
holiday.
was crazy. It was like Friday morning, nothing happened, and then all of a sudden around 2 p.m., everything started dropping. We had like multiple congressional retirements. Elise Stefanik dropping out of the New York governor's race.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Day.
It was a crazy news day. So hopefully we're winding into the holiday. But keep tuning in to Rising.
Yeah,
we're winding
of course.
into the holiday season.
We're going to get those last few stories out for you. So today on Rising, we're going to be discussing the partial Epstein Files release over the weekend and how lawmakers are responding.
We'll also be talking about the United States Coast Guard reportedly pursuing a third oil tanker in waters near Venezuela.
But first, Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
Let's talk about it. So, if you spent the weekend avoiding political headlines, finishing your holiday shopping, or just protecting your peace, here's what you might have missed. Turning Point USA hosted its annual AmericaFest in Phoenix, drawing more than 30,000 attendees and a who's who of conservative influencers, media figures, and politicians. Now, this event has been around since 2021, and it's always been loud, influential, and unified around one central enemy. That enemy usually is the quote-unquote woke left. But this year felt different. Yes, there were tons of viral moments. I mean, Nicki Minaj made a surprise appearance alongside Erika Kirk, took aim at California Governor Gavin Newsom, calling him new scum, and affirmed her support for President Trump. Let's take a look.
I have the utmost respect and admiration for our president.
She even called the president handsome. That clip made headlines, but it wasn't the most revealing moment of the weekend. What stood out wasn't who conservatives were attacking across the aisle, it was who they were attacking on their own stage. For the first time, AmericaFest wasn't defined by a common foe. Instead, it became a public airing of sorts of grievances within the conservative movement itself. Some of the most powerful voices on the right spent their time accusing each other of being things like frauds, grifters, and worse. Ben Shapiro, co-founder of The Daily Wire, kicked it off Thursday with a blistering speech aimed squarely at figures like Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly. Take a look.
The conservative movement is also in danger from charlatans who claim to speak in the name of principle, but actually traffic in conspiracism and dishonesty, who offer nothing but bile and despair, who seek to undermine fundamental principles of conservatism by championing enervation and grievance. These people are frauds, and they are grifters, and they do not deserve your time.
Less than an hour later, Tucker Carlson took the same stage, dismissed Shapiro's remarks, and told the crowd he watched the speech and, quote, laughed. The next night, the gloves fully came off. Steve Bannon didn't mince words, saying, quote, Ben Shapiro is like a cancer, and that cancer spreads. Megyn Kelly followed, calling Shapiro a marginal figure and declaring their friendship is over. She said, quote, I resent that he thinks he's in a position to decide who must say what to whom and when. Vivek Ramaswamy, who is running for Ohio's Republican gubernatorial nomination, took aim at what he's called pockets of the, quote, online right during his address Friday night at the AmericaFest that fixated on heritage and lineage rather than American ideals. This wasn't ideological debate. This was an open power struggle over who gets to define the movement and who gets pushed out. Even the leadership acknowledged the cracks. In her opening remarks, Erika Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow and Turning Point's new leader, warned of growing fractures inside the party and reflected on the aftermath of her husband's assassination.
He was assassinated. We saw infighting. We've seen fractures. We've seen bridges being burned that shouldn't be burnt.
Now, Axios reporter Mike Allen asked Andrew Colvett, Charlie Kirk's friend, the executive producer of his show and the key architect of Turning Point USA under new CEO Erika Kirk, why the organization allowed speakers to openly attack one another. Colvett explained the thinking, telling Axios, quote, we don't tell speakers what to say. Charlie never did, and we don't either. If certain speakers felt the need to address these conflicts, then we trust that these issues were issues that needed to be aired in public. And maybe that's the point. AmericaFest didn't just showcase conservative star power, it exposed a movement wrestling with its own identity. The 4-day conference reflected deep divisions over what America First actually means and where the MAGA movement goes next when it's held together by less by shared ideology and more by the gravitational pull of one man's personality. That person is Donald Trump. So I had a lot to say. I mean, there was a lot going on, but I know that was a long read because I wanted to recap everybody and not just give my perspective. But what did you think about the event? Because a lot of people are describing it as chaotic, and I was trying to be as fair as I could. But
no,
it was
I
a little
appreciate
chaotic.
it was a fair read of everything that happened. There were a lot of people in the conservative movement, I can tell you, in group chats, talking about how we were sitting down with the popcorn, just like watching it all unfold, starting with the Ben Shapiro speech, which was like the first shots fired, right?
And it was the first day.
Yeah, and he was naming and shaming. I tuned in specifically to hear Tucker's response, wondering if he was going to throw those blows back at Ben Shapiro, and he was a little more subtle. But one thing he did say, which he's kind of declined to do until now, because Tucker's the kind of person where if like someone accuses him of something, he's like, whatever, I'm not engaging with you, like I'm not doing that game. But he gave this forceful condemnation of anti-Semitism, and he got into what he believes is the sort of backbone of conservative principles coming from Christian morality. So he talked about, you know, I'm not anti-Semitic because Ben Shapiro says I have to be, or because of the current political times. I'm not anti-Semitic because my Christian values tell me that every human is created equal. And what he found so objectionable about Ben Shapiro sort of trying to gatekeep speech is that the reason why free speech matters is because human beings aren't slaves. You don't get to tell other people what to do, what to think, and what they can say. And so it was kind of getting at the heart of the issue without expressly calling out Ben Shapiro by name or even insulting him personally. So it's kind of a smart way to springboard those accusations into a broader discussion of what conservative principles are and what they mean and where they come from. So I think it wasn't as bad maybe as it seemed on the surface, the infighting on stage, but then the next day you had Steve Bannon and Megyn Kelly and things got messy again.
So when I think about the audience, $30,000 people is not a small thing.
Right.
So when you have the audience that obviously wants to come hear a variety of speakers, where does the audience mostly land? Like when you're looking at MAGA and what's happening in the party, like people are not, I don't think, over-reporting the fractures. And mind you, there's plenty in the Democratic Party, but I can't say they're over-reporting watching what happened with Marjorie Taylor Greene and the conflict between whether we should continue to support Israel in the way that we do. Yeah. There's so much happening. So like, where does the 30,000 stand? Turning Point has the hearts, ears, and minds of millions of young people. Where are young people feeling? That's what the organization was targeting about all these leaders that spoke.
Yeah, and that was what was so interesting watching these different speeches is you heard cheers for everybody, right? Even people who were on different sides of this sort of ideological battle over things like Israel and what America first means. And so it wasn't super clear who won. And that's going to be a defining part of figuring out where the movement goes post-Trump. And I think what this really tells you, though, is that people are already treating Trump like he's a lame duck president, and we're still a year out from the midterms, right? They are already trying to figure out who is going to win this power struggle for the post-Trump Republican Party, which ideology is going to win out, and the president wasn't really a fixture of conversation the way that he might have been in previous years.
Yeah, in previous years, he literally was on the stage, right? And so it was a big deal. That's the biggest thing, and I know we'll keep talking about this, but what does the party look like? And we're going to talk about J.D. Vance after President Trump, but like nobody really can say that. We have so much time between now and the next presidential election, and I know it goes by quick, but between the waning support that we're seeing with the poll numbers for President Trump and just the overall ideological divides that are happening within the party, like it kind of seems to me like it's more up for grabs than people thought maybe even a few months ago.
I think so too. This is the kind of thing you'd normally see in the final 6 months of the presidency. We're only a year in.
We got a lot to talk about. Next on Rising, the Department of Justice released hundreds of thousands of documents on Friday that are part of the Epstein Files. But since then, at least 16 files have disappeared from the DOJ website. We'll be right back with much more on that. So the Department of Justice has released hundreds of thousands of documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein in accordance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But not all the files were released, and the ones that were came with heavy redactions, leading to outrage and even threats of legal action.
Congressman Khanna and Thomas Massie, the primary sponsors of the Epstein bill, both slammed the release of the files over the weekend. They say what the DOJ did is not in compliance with their bill, which President Trump signed into law 1 month ago. Here was Khanna on Friday.
They released one document from a New York grand jury of 119 pages, totally blacked out. This despite a federal judge ordering them to release that document. And our law requires them to explain redactions. There's not a single explanation for why that entire document was redacted. We have not seen the draft indictment that implicates other rich and powerful men who were on Epstein's rape island, who either watched the abuse of young girls or participated in the abuse of young girls and the sex trafficking.
Khanna and Massie have suggested that impeachment charges should be drafted against Attorney General Pam Bondi for her handling of the files. As the backlash to release the files grew over the weekend, the DOJ put out its own response to address these redactions. It says, quote, "The Department of Justice is committed to transparency and redacting only what is legally required. The department is required by law to redact information about the victims, minors, or potential victims, as well as privileged materials. No redactions have been or will be made to protect famous individuals or politically exposed persons."
Of the files that were released, former President Bill Clinton was seen in many of them. Clinton was pictured with Epstein, as well as some major celebrities like Michael Jackson and Mick Jagger. But there was also controversy after at least 16 photos disappeared from the DOJ's website on Saturday, including one showing a photograph of President Trump. It fueled speculation online, with some suggesting that the pictures were removed from the website as part of a cover-up. But Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche called those theories laughable and said the pictures had to be removed because of concerns raised by potential victims.
Meanwhile, the New York Times published an article the same day the files were released. It claims that a woman who used to work for Epstein filed a complaint with the FBI nearly 30 years ago, accusing him of having interest in child pornography. It says the woman, Maria Farmer, has for years said that she had called federal investigators in the summer of 1996, but the FBI had never publicly acknowledged her original report, even to Ms. Farmer. Some people following the Epstein case had accused her of inventing the story. After the release of thousands of Epstein files on Friday, the New York Times contacted Ms. Farmer about a report stamped with the date of September 3rd, 1996. She broke down in tears. I've waited 30 years, she said. I can't believe it. They can't call me a liar anymore.
Wow, that's crazy, her story.
That was, and I saw that story over the weekend. As you know, these headlines came in, it was hard to follow. Like, you know, every day there was something new.
Right.
And there's a lot here. But that story really stuck out to me because I'm like, the biggest question that's still not answered is, how was Epstein able to get away with this for so long? And as much as it's become a spectacle, and there's merit to the conversation about how and why people are interested in it right now, there still are victims here and people that really want answers. And a lot of this was just volume, this last release, rather than transparency. I don't think a lot of questions were asked. There's a lot of weird stuff that we can point out about what's going on, from redacting President Trump's name when he's a political leader and not anybody that's a victim, or the pictures that have disappeared. One of them, I think, included President Trump that's now back. I think that maybe there is some kind of engagement of trying to protect Trump in any way, even though he knows that his name is in there and said release everything. But they're still like, they don't want it to be the main conversation around President Trump. But, you know, instead of just like allowing the smoke to fester in what people are seeing as a fire, it might be better to just release some of the interviews, like the FBI interviews with victims, that might paint the picture about what happened, even by canceling out the victims' names and just telling people what was said so people can understand more about how this went on for so long. That's the biggest question for me, is like, how can we never have anything like this go on for years or even days again, especially if people for 30 years have been trying to tell the FBI to please look at this man.
Yeah, and this is the latest in a long line of perceived FBI failures, whether it's the mass shooters who get reported to the FBI prior to them committing an act, and the FBI failed to follow up on those tips, or the Larry Nassar case and now the Epstein case, getting away with it for over a decade before his first indictment, which ended up, you know, he got a sweetheart plea deal out of that and ended up being able to continue his activity for another decade after that, if not longer. And so perhaps it's an FBI cover-up of its own bad behavior. But I do think the steady drip, drip, drip of the release, as opposed to dropping everything at once, the way that the administration promised, at the beginning of the admin instead of waiting until now, forcing Congress to pass this bill, it just gives the impression that they are trying to hide something. And so just from a political strategy or a communication strategy standpoint, dumping everything at once and having as few redactions as possible and explaining the redactions that are there allows this to have people are able to analyze the files, and then everybody can move on, right? But instead, they've decided to drag this out. They've been playing political games with it, and it just gives people a bad impression.
And I'll say, like, when they first got released, I thought maybe it was everything because there was so much. But when you see, like, Congress people posting on Instagram and X different full black pages and full, pages that had black every other line,
Right.
It kind of almost felt like a mockery of, because I understand the argument about protecting victims and any children that were in the photos, obviously. But when you start to see, like, endless, it's just like there's going to be questions about how much needed to be redacted. And then something that Thomas Massie keeps saying is you have to explain the redaction. So if somebody is calling for an explanation, or if the American public wants to know what was here or what was there, and what are the laws that are protecting it to make it stay redacted, and that's not being thoroughly explained, then people are kind of left in limbo to keep making up stories in their head about what could possibly be there. And I think that that's part of the issue, is that we've been having this conversation for a year now, where if everything was released almost over the weekend, I was like, wow, this is a lot. Everybody got what they wanted. And as I started going through it, I'm like, oh no, everybody didn't get everything. And I think that's what the American public keeps feeling time and time again as they keep piecemealing parts of this out. Just answer the question. I think that even our highest government officials should want to know, aside from Bill Clinton looking gross, because it did look gross, and that it's like, who else was working in coordination? Like, is there implication for Bill Clinton? Then he should be implicated if that's what the allegation is. I don't want to see any more pictures of him in the hot tub. Like, I want to know, who helped this man continue on with these heinous acts for so many years. And that's the biggest thing that's frustrating, is that it's becoming more of a headline grabber and, this attention-seeking thing, when it really should be just information so this never happens again.
Yeah, exactly. And the bill that was passed by Congress, as Khanna was explaining, does require them to explain the redactions, which they did not do. They did not provide an explanation for each redaction, which only raises further questions and speculation about what could be in the documents. The New York Times published a story last week about trying to explain how Jeffrey Epstein got as wealthy as he did.
I saw that.
Yeah, and they were like, well, basically, he was just really good at convincing rich people to give them his money. I don't know who believes that, right? Like, everybody assumes
and it was a long article,
right?
to get to that conclusion.
I know. And so it just seems like every release just whets the appetite more, I guess, for real answers.
Yeah.
All right, coming up, a mock funeral held for the penny, the coin, brought hundreds to the Lincoln Memorial this weekend. We'll tell you about it next.
If you were in D.C. this weekend and saw a group of Abraham Lincoln impersonators descend onto the National Mall, no, you weren't seeing things. Hundreds gathered at a Lincoln Memorial on Saturday to mourn the end of the penny, as the U.S. Mint pressed its final pennies last month, ending over 230 years of production.
The funeral attendees were clad in Abraham Lincoln costumes and other forms of Victorian-era garb. It was hosted by Ramp, an expense management platform. I'm on Ramp. Event co-producer Jarrell Meek said he was hired to, quote, create a silly moment, so he hired actors and comedians from D.C., New York City, Utah, Texas, and North Carolina. President Donald Trump had called for the Treasury Department to stop making pennies in a Truth Social post in February, calling it a wasteful expense. Ending production, the Treasury said, would save the federal government $56 million per year. Goodbye to the penny, farewell. Wow, sad. I don't know. I think it's obviously indicative of how we're moving to a cashless society more broadly. Like, you can't even use cash at Sweetgreen anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at least the one in Clarendon, they got rid of cash payments about 2 years ago. And there's a lot of businesses that don't allow you to pay cash. And, for the Mennonites among us, of which maybe I'm one, it's perhaps concerning how everything is digital now, right? It raises all kinds of privacy concerns and the potential for things to be stolen. Everybody's got these credit card swipers now that they're installing at your
come on, Amber,
store.
you're younger than me. You're sounding like a grandma
crazy.
right now.
I am. I'm sorry, but look, cash provides freedom of movement. It allows you to make transactions without people tracking you. And when we're in a time where debanking is now a thing, right, where people lose access to their money or they're unable to get loans or credit cards for a variety of reasons, that's concerning to me. I mean, there were a bunch of gun manufacturers or stores that sell firearms that were threatened with debanking a few years back because of school shootings. And I am concerned about the inability for people to be able to make purchases with cash.
Yeah, I'll say on that note, when I pay with my phone, it's very convenient. And then when I think about the fact that sometimes I'll leave my whole entire purse or wallet, and it's like, okay, my phone's on 1%. Now I can't even walk out of the grocery store, right? Because I have nothing.
Right.
And I think that those issues will come up, but then also more serious issues like you're bringing up are worth concern. And it's always worth it to have some cash on you. My dad's always told me that. Make sure
That's
you have
right.
some,
The emergency
yeah,
cash
have
stash.
some money on
Gotta
you. Don't
have
walk
it.
around like a fool. But separate from that, when I first watched this, I had two thoughts. I said, one, people have a lot of free time. I mean, they had a whole casket. I know some were paid actors, but they literally eulogized the penny. So it was hilarious. And then on the other hand, I was thinking about all the ways, and I feel like we're both old enough that there used to be those machines where you put a penny in and you flatten it out. And
Oh,
then, like,
yeah.
Yeah, like that was a whole
like
thing.
a souvenir thing.
And
yeah.
now I'm like, wait, I know some of these pennies sold for a lot of money, these last minted pennies. So I have a couple like kind of new pennies. Like, are those even worth like $20? I'll take
Maybe,
anything for
yeah.
a penny that's more than a penny. I'll take 5 cents for a penny. So now that that's on the table, I'm like, should I try to turn in these pennies or like the $2 bill?
That's right.
And I might be a little bit of a hoarder because I have some $2 bills.
I do too. My grandmother used to put them in cards
Me
on
too.
holidays. Yeah, it was always, if we got a card for Halloween, there would be a $2 bill in it. And
Right.
that was part of it. Was fun, right? It was like a little something from grandma.
So should we start as we get older, give kids like a little penny in there? Let's
Yeah.
pay less money. Just like I'm gonna give you a penny and a piggy bank with a penny and call it a day.
Yeah, why not? Look, I think the funeral's cute. It's obviously trying to drum up business for Ramp, which is an expense platform. Basically, you can file reimbursements with your company.
Oh, you said
for
you
it.
use it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Daily Caller uses it, and you just upload your receipt, and they can process it and put the reimbursement in your next paycheck. It's a good user interface, whatever. Clever of them to kind of take advantage of this moment and create this viral story that's going to drive business back to their
We're talking
platform.
about it.
We
Free
are.
advertisement right now. Okay, well, the United States is venturing into more uncharted waters as the Coast Guard is reportedly pushing another oil tanker near Venezuela. You guys stick around. Tensions are mounting with Venezuela as the U.S. Coast Guard is pursuing a third oil tanker in the Caribbean Sea.
This comes after a Trump administration official confirmed on Saturday that it had seized a second tanker in less than 2 weeks. According to reporting from the Associated Press, the Coast Guard, with assistance from the Navy, seized a sanctioned tanker called Skipper on December 10th, another part of the shadow fleet of tankers that the U.S. says operates on the fringes of the law to move sanctioned cargo. This past week, Trump demanded that Venezuela return assets that it seized from U.S. oil companies years ago, justifying anew his announcement of a blockade against oil tankers traveling to the U.S. traveling to or from the South American country that face American sanctions.
The actions have led to controversy as China officially condemned the seizure of the oil tankers on Monday. A spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said, quote, "The U.S. practice of arbitrarily seizing other countries' vessels grossly violates international law. Venezuela has the right to independently develop mutually beneficial cooperation with other countries, and we believe that the international community can understand and support Venezuela's stance of defending its own legitimate rights and interests."
The White House has not yet offered any comments on the pursuit of the third oil tanker, but DHS Secretary Kristi Noem did confirm the apprehension of the second tanker on Saturday. She writes on X, "The United States will continue to pursue the illicit movement of sanctioned oil that is used to fund narco-terrorism in the region. We will find you and we will stop you. Thank you to our brave men and women of the United States Coast Guard and the Department of War."
I mean, so Venezuela apparently has the largest known oil reserves in the world and moves thousands of barrels of oil each day. And so as we're doing this, naturally, I think people in Congress and constituents are going to say, this feels like another escalation, just an attack against Maduro. And for me, when we're looking at what America's next steps are and biggest interests are, and I think a lot of people at home are saying, why is it Venezuela? Even if we don't agree with what Maduro does, even if you think that his leadership is illegitimate because of the way that he won or secured his presidency, looking at what's happening there and the fact that we've bombed people and killed people that we haven't proven to be guilty, and our military has moved forward with some of those actions, given the fact that we've skipped now over Congress by labeling this entire mission against Venezuela counter-narcotics mission, and we turned it into a counter-terrorism mission, which allows the president to bypass Congress. And the many steps that we've taken in the last few months that people from Rand Paul to, Democrats have called directly out saying this is a violation of international law. We'd like to see the proof that we need to move forward in this aggressive manner. It just seems like another red flag to say, are we trying to get into some altercation with Venezuela that may lead to an opening to a bigger war? I mean, China's jumping in here, and no, the U.S. should not be scared of China or anybody internationally, but we should know if we are agitating and causing something that perhaps the American public or Congress specifically is not aligned with moving forward with.
Yeah, the China point's important. I'll get to that in a moment. I was less concerned about the strikes on the drug-carrying boats. Senator John Fetterman recently had a briefing where he reviewed the intelligence that they were using. He came out very confident that the U.S. was in the right to strike these boats. But the broader issue that I have with how the administration is handling this is that it's very clearly not just about drugs. It seems like they are walking us into a regime change war in Venezuela. And Senator Lindsey Graham effectively said this in a recent comment that he made, saying that everything the Trump administration is doing is signaling that we're getting Maduro out of power, and he needs to be out of power. Of course, Lindsey Graham would be advocating for a regime change war. He's a neoconservative hawk, right, on foreign policy. But the Trump administration, instead of being honest about what it is that we're doing, maybe this is the new Don Roe doctrine and we are just focused on the Western Hemisphere and trying to play politics in Latin America, but explain to us how that's America first. Explain to us how this is in line with no new wars, right? And they haven't done that. Instead, they are trying to slowly ratchet up the pressure and hope that people don't notice. It's like a frog in a pot of boiling water. Now, I think if you look at what they've done so far, the intention seems to be to triangulate China and to break off their relationship with Venezuela. The seizure of the oil tankers, which are a way to get oil to China and get around international sanctions, the striking of the drug boats, which helps facilitate transfer of fentanyl from China, and taking out Maduro, who is a key China ally. I think all of this probably is more about trying to counter CCP influence in Latin America. But when has U.S. involvement in Latin America ever ended well, right? We have never seen these countries end off better than they were before America got involved. And the Trump administration has just refused to provide any explanation as to why they are deciding to do this, how it benefits the American people in the long run, and what does it mean for us to be involved in a regime change war in terms of, are we going to stay in Venezuela?
Right.
Are we helping them rebuild? Are we going to have another migrant crisis where millions of Venezuelans are wanting to come to the United States to escape whatever the U.S. does there? And what does that mean for the immigration system? I just think there's so many unanswered questions, and we haven't been provided with any illumination of the administration's motives here.
And I think there's a lot of what you said there. So something that stuck out to me was the oil prices. After they initially seized the Venezuelan boat, ABC News, the first one, ABC News said that oil prices jumped about 3% from doing that. And then this week, when they threatened to put a blockade for the oil, that made oil prices rise. And so even though we're not feeling the effects right this second, as people are putting oil in their houses, like my parents still do, or putting gas in their cars, we're going to see prices possibly change. And then it goes back to that question that you just asked, how is that America first when people are really in a crunch and in a pinch this holiday season? As we've seen, people spent higher records than we've seen, but also bought way less items, meaning everything is way more expensive. So they don't need those oil prices to also jump. But when I think about regime change and look at historically how we've gone in and thought that, democracy should prevail in these foreign nations, I look at the outcomes of some of those things and what President Trump aligned himself with as he was campaigning. Like, for example, the way that we pulled out of Afghanistan and Taliban is now back in leadership there, and how we thought that they should be led differently, but it leads to some other group like ISIS coming in and taking control of a territory. I think that America has to remember that we've tried historically to remove leadership in a certain region of the world, and to no avail will continue fighting, and then they may go back to something worse, or they may go back to the same leader or something even worse, or the same leadership, agenda. And I think that that's something that we have to make sure that we're ready to accept and deal with, or maybe this will be the one time where that doesn't happen. But Americans are not even yearning or calling for this, and neither is Congress. And I think that that is the biggest issue for most people, even if they don't like Maduro in any way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Americans don't want to see us get involved in another 20-year conflict only for the country that we're supposedly helping to end up worse off on the other side of it and spending billions of dollars, American taxpayer dollars, through the Department of War to effectuate this agenda that nobody asked for. And it's very much this neoconservative strain of thought that we thought we had eliminated from the Republican Party over the past 10 years with the rise of Trump, now gaining ground again and just replicating these mistakes of the past. And it's so frustrating, as we were talking about the fight for the future of the conservative movement and for the Republican Party.
This is another big one.
Right? This is another big fight that's happening. And I think people kind of took for granted that the hawkish ways of the past were dead and gone for good. But this is a reminder of how quickly those things can creep back in.
Yeah, this is a big thing. Because I thought that President Trump was so different, even looking how we just were talking about Cheney and
right,
George
or like
W.
John
Bush.
Bolton. Like I thought those people were gone. No, but
so
now
here they are showing their heads again. Next on Rising, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are considering inherent contempt charges against Attorney General Pam Bondi over the Epstein Files. Stay tuned.
Lawmakers say they would consider filing articles of impeachment against Department of Justice officials, most notably Attorney General Pam Bondi, after the partial release of the Epstein Files on Friday, many of which were redacted. Representatives Khanna and Thomas Massie co-sponsored a bill requiring the DOJ to release all files related to the investigation into convicted sex offender, the late Jeffrey Epstein.
Since the bill was nearly unanimously passed, the DOJ was legally required to release all the files, but they only released a portion, saying the department needed to finish redacting them to protect the identities of victims or minors. Here was Khanna during speaking on Friday.
Thomas Massie and I will continue to explore all options to fight to make sure that they comply with the law, whether that is holding people in inherent contempt, recommending people for prosecution, recommending impeachment, or private lawsuits.
And here was Thomas Massie on Sunday.
Most expeditious way to get justice for these victims is to bring inherent contempt against Pam Bondi.
I mean, I hate the partisan games in Congress because I'm amongst the people of the large majority of the Americans that feel like Congress is just doing nothing. And so attacking one another, bringing somebody in the Trump administration up on impeachment charges just feels annoying and frustrating and meritless, especially when we just spent, 60 days, people not getting paid and them also not doing their job. So there's a lot that's annoying about that. But I also think, like they said, they had 30 days to release all these files. I know there was a wealth of information and a lot that may be overwhelming, but for somebody at the helm of it, like Pam Bondi, who touted having the book on her desk or whatever
the client
list, she's the one, she's part of the problem here. So you better come up with a reason and a full she should have been strategically planning the last 30 days out on how she was going to explain not releasing everything from the woman who said she had the client list. I think that is the first thing. And people are rightfully angry. Like there's some redacted files like we talked about early that are redacted without explanation, some full pages that are just black. And that's part of the agreement is that you need to explain why anything would be redacted. Minors, everybody understands. And then people really want answers to, and going back to our earlier conversation, on why he got this deal in 2007 that seemed beneficial to Epstein out of anyone who is such an egregious offender of the law, somebody who we know now from that New York Times article that we talked about earlier, one of his colleagues told the FBI that he had child pornography obsession back then 30 years ago, and nobody was really seriously looking into it. Who was protecting him? Who was working alongside him in the government, and what the answers are. And I think the more that Pam Bondi kind of pushes this off and tries to act like this is baseless and meritless and like this may be some kind of witch hunt, the worse that it'll get for her. Because as we've seen between Thomas Massie and Khanna, they are relentless in their pursuit of this. I think this will be the defining factor of some of their political lives, how long they or how much they've invested in this. We've seen them almost every Sunday or every once a week on a show, one of them talking about specifically this, even when there were several other things happening in the news, big headlines. They stuck to this Epstein case. And so I don't think that they're going to go anywhere. And so this is just going to be constantly, on like just a tick on Pam Bondi's back that she never can get off unless she addresses it head on and properly.
She should have been preparing for it well before the 30 days. She should have been preparing them for release from the beginning of the administration, right? And that obviously didn't happen. She made this bungled this interview about how she had the client list on her desk. And even people within the DOJ and the FBI were sort of pinning the blame on her anonymously for not handling the file situation correctly. And now here we are back at the same place again, where she is rightfully getting some of the blame for the inability to satisfy the appetite of the public and to do what the law passed by Congress requires, right? And so I understand why they're moving forward with the impeachment articles, but I also very much agree with your complaint that Congress's priorities seem so out of whack right now, where for the Republicans, at least, you would think that they would be singularly focused on codifying Trump's agenda, right? If he signs an executive order, you should immediately introduce a bill in the House or in the Senate to actually make that law so that it doesn't get immediately overturned when the next president comes in and signs a bunch of executive orders just erasing what Trump did. And instead, we're still arguing about ACA subsidies and impeaching Pam Bondi. Like, it just seems so unserious to me. Even Democratic Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia came out and said that he's not interested in looking at impeachment at this time. I am curious about what that means and why the Democrats aren't all on board, whether they think that it's just not going to go anywhere, so it's not worth their time. Maybe they want to continue to have that healthcare fight. I'm not sure. But the fact that someone from the Democratic Party would come out and basically put the brakes on this effort by Khanna is pretty telling, I think, about what we can expect from this, which is probably not a lot.
Well, I think that Democrats have a lot of wind against their back, showing from the last election and understanding that President Trump's approval rating is not that great, understanding that people, even if the overall goal of tariffs are one thing, people are feeling differently about the economy and how he's done so far on that. And I think overwhelmingly, there are a lot of thoughts and feelings, whether strong for or against what President Trump's agenda has been the first year. And Democrats understand that. And so they know that with this wind beneath their wing, if they get some more policy and speak to specific policy that is regional, kind of like Abigail Spanberger did in Virginia, and not talk about President Trump so much, they just use the wind against their backs and talk about those policies, that might be a winning message, rather than try to look like they're going after political foes like they did for the entire last 4 years, attacking Donald Trump almost every day. And as we saw, for the highest Democrat in the land running for president, Kamala Harris, that wasn't a winning issue. People wanted you to talk directly to what's happening every day in the economy and what policies you're putting forward. And so I think attacking Pam Bondi or bringing her up in inherent contempt charges will seem like another one of those things that we're constantly criticizing Congress for doing. And they know that as we go into a midterm year, that might not be the best agenda. But I did see with inherent contempt that doesn't actually require Senate approval. So they can move forward if they would like to bring Pam Bondi to make her answer to this stuff. They can move forward without Senate approval, and they'll actually be able to find Pam Bondi daily until the documents are released, which again, I don't know how this all plays out with her actually paying it or what the protocol is after that, but the fact that there'll be a fine that she has to consider or has to justify for days or even weeks will be one of those things that will keep the pressure on for her to do something else. So hopefully she just makes the right decision and follows the law and releases all the documents and explains why this has been such a blank show that everyone's been, when we've been following along for the ride, she's just dragging the American public for the ride. And even as somebody, and I tell Robbie this all the time, I was not interested in pursuing the Epstein Files to this degree, right? After he died and after Ghislaine Maxwell was brought to justice, I was kind of like, okay, as I saw the victims move forward, that made me start to think about, oh, wow, there's people that really still think that these files should be fully released. And obviously part of it was just hearing how the Democrats got riled up about what's in there. So I fell for it and was like, wait, what is in there, right? Some of it which we've seen for years now. But I do think now that we're here, you can't put it back in the bottle. You can't it's already spilled milk, like you can't put it back in. So we have to kind of move forward with what the American public has already had access to and understands. And she has to release all the information and explain why so much hasn't been released yet and why she's not following the law.
Yeah, I mean, the only final point I'll make on this is that I know Robbie says this a lot, and I do agree with him, is that people are probably not going to be satisfied no matter what ultimately comes out, just like people weren't satisfied with the JFK files or whatever else was released. It's just, people want there to be a really broad, far-reaching conspiracy, and they want a smoking gun. And with whatever redactions are made, even if there weren't redactions, I think the reality is that if there's a cover-up going on, the cover-up's not going to be explained in the files, right? Like, come on, like the government's just going to release the evidence of their own cover-up. I just think no matter what happens, people are going to be disappointed.
But you do think there might be a cover-up going on?
There might be. I mean, I know. Who's behind it? There could be any number of explanations, right? All right, up next, comedian Tim Dillon shares his take on Erika Kirk's endorsement of Vice President J.D. Vance. We'll be right back after this.
Comedian Tim Dillon questions Erika Kirk's endorsement of Vice President J.D. Vance to be the 48th president.
In the Saturday episode of The Tim Dillon Show, the podcaster and comedian said it's weird and uncomfortable to see Erika endorsing Vance. Let's listen.
The guy got shot 3 months ago, and she walks out to a pyrotechnic display, and then she goes, we're going to elect J.D. Vance. It's weird that that's where her head is at. It's difficult for many people to relate to. It's not relatable for people that talked about how Hollywood isn't relatable.
Here's some more from Dillon.
Hollywood is out of touch. This looks a lot like Hollywood to most people. And to go out through a stream of fireworks and sparklers and stand there in a glittering pantsuit and talk about electing J.D. Vance 3 months after your husband was killed, many people feel that there is something off about that.
In the opening speech of Turning Point USA's annual national conference in Phoenix, Erika Kirk did endorse Vice President J.D. Vance for the 2028 presidential election. Let's take a look.
We are going to get my husband's friend, J.D. Vance, elected for 48 in the most resounding way possible.
Meanwhile, Tim Dillon also said that looking at the TPUSA event with many right-wing MAGA personalities publicly sparring makes liberals like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani, quote, look great in comparison. Can we just talk about the Erika Kirk thing? Because I really was trying to, as a mom and somebody who has grieved different things and have been around people who've grieved in their own ways. There's part of me that's like, some people grieve by like throwing themselves into work and, doing whatever she might be doing. But then the other part of me that has a child is like, well, if you lose the father of your children, that 3 months after, I'm assuming, is completely something that no one can relate to unless they've been through it. And to see all the ways that she's been forward facing and decidedly became the leader of this organization, it just seems like there's moments where it's like, anybody watching this, like Tim Dillon was saying, would be like, man, this feels a little bit off for the moment, unless she's one of those people who just throws herself completely in work. But it's like, your kids are home, you just lost your husband. Like, you don't have to do all this stuff. You don't have to come out with the sparklers. You don't have to be the face of this whole thing. There's a lot of people probably raising their hands in TPUSA, and you understand the organization way more closely than I do, that maybe could have done the job, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think if it's true that Charlie wanted Erika to do it, her kind of coming out hard and fast and trying to sort of take the reins the way that she has kind of prevents perhaps that sort of jockeying for position internally. But it's difficult. I mean, it's also possible when you're grieving that intensely, like a lot of people get really numb. And so you can put on this sort of public display of bravery, and then behind closed doors, it's an entirely different thing. So I do try to give her a lot of grace on these issues. There were a lot of comments about whether the endorsement was too soon and why do it now. Like typically you would want to wait to make an endorsement of that nature closer to the election to really give it more weight and to get the most media attention possible. And it kind of shows that Erika, at her core, is not a political operator in the way that Charlie Kirk was. Tyler Boyer was actually asked, he's one of the top TPUSA officials, was asked about this decision by Reagan Reese at the Daily Caller at AmFest. And his argument was basically, as we have all of this infighting on the right, being very clear about who TPUSA is going to support in 2028 prevents like a Biden-Kamala type situation where the party is confused and not knowing who to back. So it kind of takes that off of the table. But there's just so much time that I'm not sure that an early endorsement is going to necessarily prevent all of these fractures that we've been talking about.
And we have to remember the audience that Turning Point USA is speaking to, which is young people. Young people are known on both sides of the aisle to challenge what has been historically just handed to them. Like, no, we don't want this. And so when I think about all the different fighting that we're seeing coming from within MAGA's base that was happening at this AmericaFest, and then see what young people who were cheering for all people that came on there has had different thoughts and feelings, for you to just tell them we're going for J.D. Vance when J.D. Vance has not done a debate against other Republican nominees. There's people like Marco Rubio who have said they're not going to run, but seemingly, has been waiting his turn longer than J.D. Vance has, so he may still want to run. Or somebody new, young, in the next 3 years that may want to step up to the plate and move forward. It seems like an interesting time to say that because young people are going to rally behind, and it could be surprisingly whoever they think has their best interest. And I think when we watch what happens with healthcare and how many Republicans go on record to say they will or will not support moving things forward, like subsidies that were for Obamacare or not, but when people see the implications and how it directly impacts them, then they're going to have a lot to discuss about, oh, well, where did all these people lie on these issues? And then they can make those decisions as policies really get implemented and they see how they're affected.
Well, and how is Vance going to handle the rest of the Trump administration, particularly if Republicans lose the midterms as heavily as anticipated and it becomes a lame duck presidency? Like, what does that mean for J.D. Vance? How is he going to continue to have this national profile? What policies is he going to advance in an environment that's much more difficult for them in terms of how much political power they have? So I think the next 3 years are going to tell us a lot. And I personally wouldn't make an endorsement this early.
Well, that does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next time.